I'm Kathleen Robinson. I moved it to 15 Leland Street, which is right off Wachusett Street, abutting up next to the Forest Hill Cemetery in 1983. I think that I moved there with my then partner, Deborah Bernard. We kind of decided to move there because it was the only thing we could possibly afford. At that time, Deborah was at that time working for a group in Codman Square called We Can. And it was a group of Dorchester people that were trying to lift their neighborhood out of what was then most of Roxbury and Dorchester, and is that better? Yeah. Okay, I need to tip it. Yeah. So all of that part of Boston was just considered bad and dangerous, and everyone in Boston assumed that you wouldn't live there if you had any choice. And she was part of a group that was trying to improve the neighborhood. I told her recently I had a crush on her at the time, and I thought, wow, you improved the neighborhood just by walking in there. But she said, we don't have any money, but we can look for houses around here because nobody, the houses are worthless. Nobody considered building new houses in this area, and this area of Jamaica Plain was sort of right on the edge of it. And so there was a lot of abandoned property that either never had been built on, or the houses that had been there had burned. A lot of houses, especially in Dorchester and Roxbury, very near this area, the absentee landlords, when they couldn't get any money for their house, decided they would just burn them for the insurance money. And that was happening so close to this area that this area was also redlined. You couldn't buy, it was hard to buy a house here because you couldn't, no insurance company would insure it. But the state set up a special program so that you could insure it through this state program if you could prove that you weren't an arsonist. So we were looking around in Roxbury and Dorchester in this area, and we found that house, which I think it was empty at the time. I don't know who lived in there before, although I mentioned to someone that there was a ghost in there when we moved in. But that ghost sort of moved on when we repainted all the rooms. Anyway, when we moved in there, we saw that there was this abandoned space right in front of our house. It was referred to by the neighbors as the lots, and it was basically a junk heap. People had been dumping construction waste there for a long time. There were 3 cars that had been abandoned that were sitting there. There was 1 refrigerator, and there was knotweed, Japanese knotweed, which some of you may know is like, it's an indestructible invasive plant that grows up. It was growing up through all the junk, all over it, and the neighbors told us when we moved in, don't go out there, pointing to that, because it's dangerous out there. What they meant was that there were a lot of kids doing drugs and drinking, and in that area, so most of the neighbors avoided walking anywhere near it. Our house was right next to it, and we sort of looked out and we said, well, don't go out there. Kind of looks like our front yard. So our neighbors, another gay couple, had just bought the house next door to us at 10 Wachusett. And we all decided we're going to go out and start picking up trash. And start calling the city and asking them to come and remove the cars. And when we did that, a bunch of little kids came running over. And they said, there were about 5 or 6 of them. And they said, can we help you? So we gave them gloves and a trash bag. And they joined in, and then their mothers came over, and their mother said, we told you never to come out here. And they said to their mothers, well, these ladies, they're cleaning it up. And their mother said, cleaning it up? And then they said, oh, well, maybe we'll help too. and then pretty soon even 1 or 2 fathers came, not many. But that was really how the beginning of the Leland Garden is. I really wanted to talk about the Leland Garden because...
Kathleen, can we ask people to raise their hand if they know it?
Oh, who's been to the Leland Garden? Okay, great. Well, yeah, so that was around 1984 that we began cleaning it up. And the cleanup went on for years, but eventually then what happened was that one time my partner Deborah was out there and she saw a man who, because she worked for an arson prevention program in Codman Square, she recognized this man. His insurance was about to be canceled because of all of his properties that had burned. And she said, he didn't know who she was, she knew who he was. And she said to him, what are you doing here? And he said, well, I'm kind of looking at this property. I'm thinking of acquiring this to build condominiums. Well, we were shocked because as far as we knew, no one was building new houses here. This was like a worthless area that the city had invested nothing in except basic services. But when we heard him say that, we realized, well, maybe we, the neighbors, if we want to keep it a public open space and we want to clean it up, maybe we better find a way to own it. And so we approached Boston Natural Areas Fund, which at that time was a brand new organization started by John Blackwell, who and the aim was to acquire spaces in Boston to keep them green and open to the public so that not everything would be developed. And so we went to, so that they were a land trust, so we said, well, maybe we could form a land trust. So we went to them and asked, can you tell us, how can we form a land trust? And there was a group of neighbors that did it. It was about 7 or 8, and a few of us were homeowners, but not all. A lot of them were tenants who really liked the area and liked the fact that we were cleaning it up. So they said, well, we could acquire it, and especially if you want to garden it, they said, then we could own it and they could acquire it from the city just by paying what was owed in back taxes. And then you can be in charge of it as the neighborhood. So that's what happened. And then that was in about '84. And then the sort of gardening went on in fits and starts. Mainly we were trying to get the knotweed out, which was almost impossible. I wrote a history in 2008 of the garden, and I wrote that getting the drug dealers out was quite easy compared to getting the knotweed. That really seemed quite impossible, because like one thing we did, we would cut it down, and then we got all this old carpeting and tried to cover up a huge area where the knotweed was cut down with old carpeting. And it didn't come up through the carpeting, but it moved to an area which we'd already cleared and came up there. So, but eventually, one person made a kind of a little spiral, dug a little spiral bed and planted corn in it, and the next year another person planted herbs in that spiral, and everybody loved that. And so that's how the idea of an herb garden, when Leland Garden first started, it was called Leland Garden Herb Garden. That's how that was born. In 1988, we applied to the city. They had a grassroots program. It was called Grassroots, and it was federal money that was administered through the city, and you could apply to get grants to build something good, like a garden. And so we applied, and we got $25,000, which made us feel incredibly rich. And then we hired a landscape architect, and she had a number of meetings with which a bunch of neighbors came to, people who'd been cleaning it up, and she said, everybody bring a drawing of what you'd like to see here. Or if you can't draw, just make a list. And it was based on all those drawings that she drew the first plan for Leland Garden. And we got the money in 1989 or 8, and basically the rule was we had to you spend all the money in 1 year and complete the plan, the proposal that we've made. We had to complete it in 1 year. So then the activity in the was really hectic. A lot of people got involved and were excited about it. And we had work days practically every week during the fall and summer and spring of 1988 and 1989. We planted a lot of shrubs and fruit trees. I don't know if some of you remember, you might remember Bill Taylor. He started a program a little later after us of planting fruit trees in vacant lots around the city. But before he did it, you could get fruit trees from the agricultural branch of University of Massachusetts. So we got a bunch of fruit trees, and we got a backhoe owner that we could pay to do the grading that we needed. We got an arborist. Okay, yeah, I know, it's too long. Well, the long and the short is that yes, it did open as a community garden
like the Emmys.
Turn that one. But give it to Kevin. Yeah, do it.
It opened in 1990 with a big party. And the kids that helped build it were very happy. And I have a history that's written. I also have some scrapbooks that I put together from different things we've collected. I'd love to show you the scrapbooks afterwards if you want to see.
Thank you. So my name is Mary Coonan, and we moved here in 1996. So I'm relatively new, along with Mike, a little bit longer. And when we were on the tail end of, I think, the stories that were told of the crime and things that were happening in the neighborhood, Mindy and I had just moved back from Nicaragua, where we were doing work in the community. We were doing revolving loan funds and working in a lot of the rural communities, and we lived in Brighton for about 2 years and decided that we wanted to live in Jamaica Plain because people like Kathleen, we'd heard the stories of the activities that were happening in the community, and we were looking for community, but also for community activism. Then this was a place where that was going to happen. So we bought the house, the greenhouse right next door, right there. 3 cars were stolen in front of the house. There were muggings that were happening up and down the house, and the people were coming in the front window of all the first floors of the houses and breaking the windows of cars. We had a friend come for dinner one day and came outside, and the car windows were bashed in. So we were new at this tenant thing, and we said, well, we'll fix it up first, and we'll rent that out. It's the first thing that we do. And we then, I think this one maybe died. Is this working? Okay. So we felt a little guilty about bringing someone into the neighborhood where all these muggings were happening, so we offered the apartment to what turned out to be a very, very good friend of ours in the final analysis, and we said, but we gotta tell you, there's been cars stolen, muggings happening, people breaking in the front window, and we're gay. So if you have any problem with any of those things, don't take the house. And she did, she didn't have any problem with it whatsoever. And I think what I really want to say is that our experience here has been one of community. And it has been community that has changed from time to time. When we first moved in, we were very active. We had a neighborhood newsletter. I don't know if any of you remember that. We went around interviewing our neighbors, and then we produced a newsletter that didn't have any kind of regularity, but anyway, it did come out. And we actually misspelled the title of the newsletter. It was supposed to be the Neighborhood News, very original, but it ended up being the Neighborhood News. we thought that was so great, we never changed it. So the Neighborhood News that went on for several years, and then we also did these, every year we did 2 parties. One was it was a party during the summertime, and the other one was a cabin fever party, which we held up at the church, and it was, it was entertainment by the neighbors, for the neighbors, and it was a potluck. And one year, I think we did a fashion show. One of the neighbors was an importer of African garments, so we all wore African garments and did the runway. So that's my experience, is that this has been a great, great place, a great neighborhood. And it continues to be that there are new leaders that are coming. And I would say each decade has its leadership. And that's been just really beautiful thing to see. And I'll tell one real quick story and then pass it to Emmanuel that I think illustrates what the neighborhood was about. In this house, I don't know if any of you remember the Duffys. Has anybody been around long enough to know the Duffys?
I didn't know them, and I've been around a long time.
Yeah. So the daughter, Marie, had a lack of oxygen to her brain when she was born. So she was very high functioning and worked at the hospital and everything, and she would, took things literally. If you'd say, Marie, watch the house, 8 hours later she'd be sitting in the chair watching the house. But she had never really had a normal high school experience, so she wanted to go to prom. And the neighbors, Chris and Stephen, who lived right across the street here, and there was a neighbor that lived up on the top floor that was a chef at the top of the round. And so they rented a stretch limousine. There was a neighbor down the street that was a photographer, and they told her, just get dressed up. And she came down the stairs and into the stretch limousine, they were in tuxes, and said, my prom, my prom. And she was so moved, and I think that experience to me is really illustrative of what this neighborhood is like. And there's so many stories that people could tell, those kinds of kindnesses, looking out for each other, looking for justice, as Kathleen was talking about, the social justice in the area. So I'm just grateful to be here and really grateful for Matt and Amy and Mike